Before I start, I'd just like to thank tonight's sponsors, the Gateway Action Helpline. The helpline is an organization which provides for anyone everywhere who is struggling. Their volunteers are available 10 till 10 from Sunday till Thursday. They've all been highly trained to deal with any crisis that a person from any age might be facing. And they're available on the helpline number, which is advertised heavily around Manchester. If anyone needs the number, I'm happy to send it them. They can private message. Okay, so before I start, I think it's really important whenever anybody buys a book or anybody takes medical advice or any advice whatsoever, they have a right to know who it is who's giving them the advice, who the author of the book is. And it's important to know that the person who's giving the advice has a right to give such advice. And it's no different either when it comes to the topic we're talking about tonight of parenting. Obviously, it's a very, very difficult topic, and it's as important when one gets medical advice. It's just as important to get to find out the right doctor. So too, when it comes to parenting, it's also extremely important that the person giving the advice or has a right to do so. So therefore, I feel it's important before I start to give over the credentials, if you can call it that I have. So Baruch Hashem, I've had the zechus for the last 15 and a half years to work very closely with struggling teenagers, both in a yeshiva that I worked in before I opened my own yeshivas, which I have done for the last 12 years. And I've been zeicha really to have a very, very much an inside view of teenagers' life, very different from perhaps what a therapist sees when they see them once or twice a week in therapy, because I've had the zechus to see them 24/7, 365, through the ups, through the downs, through the times when nobody believed in them, and ultimately through the chuppah, and when they bring their children to bris and further. I also have been zeicha to be able to help parents as well who've been struggling over the last few years. I've had the opportunity to help a number of parents who have been struggling with their children. So that's what gives me the right, so to speak tonight, although I hope that I do justice to the faith that everyone listening has put in me. So I'd like to preface tonight's topic with a story that I heard from Rabbi Wallerstein. So he relates the following story. There was once a girl called Ruti. Ruti was born to parents, and unfortunately she was born blind. She was unable to see. And obviously that came with its own challenges. And as Ruti grew up, the parents did the best that they could for her. They put her in the best schools they could find for her. But obviously she led a very limited life, and it was very difficult for her. She had friends and she grew up. She did what she could, but obviously she missed out on many things in life. As Ruti grew older, she went to SEM and left SEM, and obviously her friends started to go into shidduchim and get married, and Ruti was left a bit on the sidelines because it was extremely difficult to find the right match for Ruti, as she was blind. She had a big, obviously, disability. Eventually, a shadchan found a boy called Chaim. Chaim met Ruti, and he decided, you know what, he's going to give his life over to Ruti, and he's going to marry Ruti. And they met, they loved each other very much, and they got married, and they spent many happy years together. Chaim was basically a nursemaid to Ruti. He looked after her, he took her here, he took her there. And as the years went on, things, they came into what was normal in their life. Obviously, they didn't do the same. They didn't go on family outings like everybody else, but they did their things. Anyway, one day, Chaim comes home from work, and he says to Ruti, "You're never going to believe this. I heard on the radio today that there's a doctor somewhere in America who can do an operation. He can transplant eyes, and it says even people who've been blind since birth, he's going to be able to transplant those eyes. I've given him a call already. I've given the clinic a call, and I'm waiting for a call back tomorrow." And they're so excited, and they speak about the possibility if it's really going to happen. They're a bit scared to put more in than tentative hopes. But tomorrow comes, and they get a call back from the clinic. And all their hopes are dashed when they hear there's a huge waiting list. There's a number of years. It's going to be 10 years before she's going to be able to even get anywhere near a transplant. There's so many people who want this operation. And the hopes are dashed once again, but once they'd hoped, it's not as easy anymore. And Ruti fell into a bit of a depression. A month later, Chaim comes home and goes, "Ruti, you're never going to believe it. I got a call from the clinic. Next month, you have a slot. They found a donor for you, and you have a slot. You're going to get new eyes in a month's time." Ruti can't believe it. She's so excited, and wow, Chaim, it's just unbelievable. It's going to be amazing. We're going to have such a good life together. And they talk, that's the only thing they talk about for the next month, and they get ready mentally and physically. The time comes when they have to travel for the operation, and they travel, they have the operation. And Ruti has to stay in bandages for a number of weeks afterwards, and they come home. And slowly but surely, they start to take off the bandages. And at first, she can just see, a bit of light, and she can see shapes and figures. And Chaim sits down with her one evening and says to her, Ruti, soon you're going to be able to see properly. You're going to be able to see everything around you. And I want to tell you something. I want to tell you a secret that I've kept from you all these years, because I didn't want you to know about it. But I am also blind. And Ruti's like, wow, Chaim, and you looked after me so well all these years. I'm so excited that now I'll be able to see and I'll be able to look after you, to thank you for all those years of devotion that you've given to me. And that's what happened. Ruti gets the bandages off. She's able to see for the first time in her life, and she takes in the world around her. She takes in the people. She takes in, it's unbelievable. She can't believe it. She can see. And of course, she's got her husband with a disability, Chaim, who used to look after her. And now she spends a lot of the time looking after him. Chaim can't do as much as he used to be able to do. And she spends a lot of the time looking after him. The months go by and Ruti gets a bit fed up. She's like, I've never seen the world. I've never been to a zoo. I've never been to a park. There's so much that I haven't seen and I really want to see it. And I'm being held back by Chaim. So she decides that there's no other thing for it. And the idea develops in her head more and more. And she decides, you know what? I'm going to have to ask Chaim for a divorce. So with a heavy heart, she says to Chaim, there's so much that I want to see. There's so much of the world that I want to see. And you're holding me back because of your disability. And I appreciate all that you've done for me all these years. But there's nothing I can do. I think I want to ask you for a divorce. And Chaim says, something, I understand. And I expected that. That's fine. I'll move out. So that day, Ruti goes out to her job. Chaim packs up and he leaves a letter for Ruti. Ruti comes home that night. Chaim's taken his stuff already. And there on the table is a letter. She opens up the letter. And on the letter, it says that, dear Chaim, dear Ruti, and he describes their whole life together and speaks about how thankful he is that they had that time together. And he finishes off with a sentence and he says to Ruti, Ruti, I wish you the best of luck with your new life. And I'm really happy that you're now able to see. But do me one favor, look after those eyes because they used to be mine. The nimshal from this mashal is that, this is obviously an example. The nimshal from this mashal is that HaKadosh Baruch Hu, when he creates a child, Chazal tell us, there's three partners in a man, in a child. There's the Rabbeinu Shloim, who's the master partner. There's us, the mother and the father. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu takes a bit of himself. He takes a chelek elokai mimal. He takes that neshama, which every Jew, regardless of how observant they are, regardless whether they're born to a frum family or a not religious family, it's irrelevant. Every single Jew is born with a chelek of Hashem inside him. He's born with a neshama inside him. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu is the senior partner. He's the one who's chosen which parents to give that neshama to. He's decided the path of life which that neshama is going to take, the trials and tribulations that neshama is going to face. And when he puts that neshama into the family that he gives it to, he's decided that these partners, the junior partners, the parents, are the ones who I have found to be the best partners to look after this neshama of mine. And we have to bear that in mind. We have to remember those eyes and remember that this neshama that we've been given is being entrusted to us, and we have to give that back. And one day we're going to have to answer to Hashem what we did with that neshama. So obviously, if it's an autopilot kid, if it's an easygoing kid who does everything right, who we all wish for, then, that's an easy job. But sometimes Hashem has more belief in us than that and feels that he can challenge us and he's going to give us more. We can do more. He can get us to a higher place in Gan Eden by giving us a bit more of a challenge. And in order to carry on with these next three sessions, I think it's very important, first of all, to address a fear which unfortunately comes from the Golus that we're in. We're living in a terrible time. We're living in a Golus which Moshe Rabbeinu saw and Daniel Hanavi saw when he was in Bavel. He saw what was going to be in the future Golus that Klal Yisrael were going to suffer and all the future exiles. And they both saw that the exile we were going to suffer today is worse than all the sufferings that Klal Yisrael have suffered throughout the generations. And that exile is the one we're living in now, and it's where we see children who are really, really struggling badly. And that leaves us with a strong fear. Almost all parents that I speak to, and I've heard from many other people, there's a deep-seated fear among parents that my child is going to go OTD, which is translated by most people as off the derech. People in the field, as coined by Mrs. Batya Rodel, have coined it as on their derech. They take a different derech from the one that we've brought them up to be. They change the expectations that we've had in them, and they lead themselves on a life which looks like to us that they've chosen for themselves. And this is important, that because if we don't address this fear, it'll be impossible to work with enjoying our teenagers and actually getting it right with our teenagers. So I think it's important that I address this session, this first session, to working it out, to what's going on with teenagers that do leave the fold, that do go OTD, why they go OTD, and why, even though rightly so, all the schools have a worry about it and parents have a worry about it, but why it shouldn't be a concern which is first and foremost in our mind. And certainly it shouldn't be affecting our relationship with our children, the fear that perhaps they might go off the derech. So we need to first understand what is going on with the struggling teenagers. So I'm going to devote this session to why, and the truth is it needs hours and hours and hours of understanding why a child goes off the derech. So I'm going to try and do it as concise as possible, because obviously we don't have all the time in the world, but I'm going to try and do it as brief as possible and bring out some important points to understand what is going on and why there's no necessity to fear that my child might go off the derech. Now, obviously, whenever someone has a struggling child, it's important that you get opinions, that you get advice, but opinions should only be taken from people who are in the field. No one would ever go, if they were diagnosed with a physical illness, chas v'shalom, no one would ever go to a neighbor in shul or to a friend of the family and ask them advice, what they should do medically wise, what treatments they should take. Obviously, you'll go to a doctor, you'll go to a medical professional, and you'll find out. And the same is true when in chinuch. This is a very, very delicate topic, and it's something which takes a lot of years of understanding, and nobody should go to people, their neighbors or their friends, and ask them for opinions and advice on the matter, because just because they brought up their own children doesn't necessarily make them understand what's going on with our children. So, and as well, if someone does advise you, that time to try it on their own children first, and again, make sure we're going to Rabbanim who understand the matter, and Gedolim who understand it so well. The Gedolim understand it so well, and other people, experts who are in the field who've been working with children like this. So the first point that I want to mention is something which took place in the 1990s. The Jewish Observer, which was the main family, the main Jewish magazine at the time, before Mishpacha, before Ami, that was the main, I think maybe the only Jewish magazine there was at the time. And they ran an article in the 1990s, which when the off the derech phenomenon was coming out in the 1990s in America, they ran an article and they blamed parents, they blamed certain parents, maybe Bali Teshuva or whatever it was, that it was their fault that children were going off the derech, it was their bad parenting. Rabbi Shimon Russell, who is a leading psychotherapist in the Jewish world today, he took this to task because he was working with children who were struggling, and he knew this wasn't true. There was no rhyme or reason apparently at the time, and there certainly wasn't a pattern of certain parents whose children went off the derech. There was no such thing at the time. So he got together with colleagues of his, with other psychologists and doctors and people who were working in the field with children who were struggling. And they went to a seminar in a hotel, they locked themselves in, and they brainstormed what risk factors could be involved when a child starts to struggle, when a teenager starts to struggle. Together they came up with 27 risk factors, and they put these risk factors down. And they then gave this questionnaire, these 27 risk factors, they gave it out to people working in the field, to children themselves who were struggling, and they've given this out many, many hundreds, if not thousands of times. The results that they got back initially were staggering. And I heard myself from Shimon Russell how staggered he was when these results came out. Out of the 27 risk factors they came up with, 25 of them came in at below 26%. So that's an irrelevant number really. If 25 things come in at below 26%, those things were things like poverty, like loss of a loved one, single parents, whatever it was, they kept bullying in school, lots of different things that they came up with came in at below 26% of children reported that this was what the catalyst which bothered us in our life. One of the things came in at 42%, and that was ADD and ADHD, which is attention deficit disorder with hyperactivity, which means that a child who we expect them in our culture, in all cultures really, children are expected to sit in school and be very much learning based, be able to sit on their seat and concentrate for a huge amount of time, and often 6 days a week. And children who suffer from attention deficit disorder struggle with that tremendously. It's almost an impossible task for them to do. It is an impossible task for them to do. Yet we expect them to do it, and we medicate them to do it. We mess around with their brains in order to try and get them to live up to the expectations we have over them. So that came in at 42%. 42% of children who had gone OTD said that that was why they went OTD, because of their struggles with ADHD. The last risk factor came in at 80%, which is a staggering difference between the 42%. Came in at 80%, and that was sexual abuse, intimate abuse, which children had suffered. And that means, obviously, I'm not going to go into that topic right now, because obviously that's a topic for itself. But needless to say, we're not talking about the cases, the crazy cases you hear of a Rebbe who was molesting children, etc., which does happen, unfortunately, and we have to be careful to do our best to make sure these things don't happen and we stand up against it. But also, these things happen. We're talking about any type of trauma that a child is exposed to, things which he's not expecting to see, things which he's been exposed to and he doesn't know where to go with it. 80% of children reported that this was the catalyst that made them go OTD. So what comes out from that, he took that back to the Jewish Observer, and it led to them writing a huge magazine for itself on kids that were struggling. And they brought out in 1999 an entire issue which was devoted to struggling kids, understanding kids that were going off the derech, which is a phenomenal work, and it really changed things around in the world. What came out from that was that it's not a religious issue at all. It's not children who have got a problem with their religion, who've got a problem with Judaism, who are going off the derech or going on their own derech. That was nothing to do with it. It was because something had happened in their life which made them go like that. And I heard a very good mashal from Rabbi Fishoff, who's a tremendous mumche in this field in America. And I'm going to bring in a couple of things from him tonight. He says, if you were to go down the road and you'd see a car crashed around the lamppost with 5 dead bodies inside it, you're not going to say, oh, what a stupid car. What was it thinking? You know, it should have just carried on its merry way. And why did it wrap itself around the lamppost and kill the people inside it? Obviously, something has happened. If a car's wrapped itself around the lamppost and killed the people inside it, something has gone on to make that car end up there. The driver was drunk, skidded on ice, whatever it was. Something happened for this car crash to happen. And when we look at children and we say to them, oh, they're so stupid, how can they wreck their lives like that? It's like blaming the car. Something has happened to make this sweetest kid, to make a kid that we enjoyed for the first 10, 12, 13 years of his life, who we loved and we enjoyed. If he's gone cuckoo, if he's gone crazy and something's going wrong with him, obviously something has happened to make him go like that. And religion isn't the issue. Sometimes we can make religion the issue. Baruch Hashem, because most of the Jewish children we see around are doing so well, there's such a huge percentage which are doing well, we feel a bit empowered that we can judge and we can dismiss the struggling children as Bali Taiva, which brings us on to point number 2, that we can't dismiss them as Bali Taiva. We can't say that they've got their desires to mess around with the world out there, to mess around with all the outside influences. We can't blame the internet, we can't blame girls and drugs, etc. And the reason for that is because healthy people who are Bali Taiva are able to function. I've had people who've worked for me in my yeshivas who are successful young men, who when they were in yeshiva did really well, but at the same time they were actually messing around with girls on the quiet, they were smoking drugs, but they functioned and nobody knew about it because they did it in the evening, and they got up the next morning and they were able to sit with the chavrusas and learn through entire Siddharim and do really well in yeshiva, and they came out the other end. When they grew up, they did well, they came out, they got married, and they settled down to good lives. We all know from the world around us, people, work very hard during the week in order to spend it in the pubs at the end of the week, and they can drink themselves silly over the weekend, and they come into Monday morning work at 9 o'clock on time. They might be a bit groggy on Mondays, but they're able to work, they're able to function, and they're living throughout whatever desires they want, and it's not making them dysfunctional. So often we hear that these kids are enjoying their lives, they're just doing it because they want to hang out with girls, they want to have an excuse, etc. But it's not true, because if that was the case, they would be functioning. And if you ask any parent who has a child that's struggling, they will tell you how many times they've arranged for them to have a job on a Monday morning, even at 11 o'clock, and the kid isn't able to get up for that job. How many times they've arranged new jobs when he's been in a job for a few days and is unable to hold down the job because the boss is an idiot, or something else happened, or they say something stupid, or they weren't reliable, they were unable to turn up, they were unable to get out of bed. How many times are they, you put something, you offer to take them out, you offer to take them away to a theme park or whatever it is, and they can't get up in the morning, they can't stimulate themselves to be able to go and enjoy themselves properly, because that's nothing to do with their taiva. It's to do with the fact that they're dysfunctional. They've got tremendous pain inside them. Something has happened, like we said before. we can assume 80% of them have been horrifically abused, that there's serious dysfunction going on inside of them because they're in so much pain. Now, the easiest way to put that down for us is, imagine you have a migraine. And when we have a migraine, we pack ourselves into bed and we take some tablets and, we hopefully survive. But these kids are living with tremendous, tremendous pain. And another marshal from Rabbi Fisher, he said that when we saw in 2001 horrific pictures of people jumping out the Twin Towers when the planes flew into the Twin Towers in September 2001, these people were jumping out of a fiery inferno, but they were jumping out to a certain death. Why were they jumping out? Maybe there was a chance they would be saved inside. They were jumping out to something which was certain. And obviously, because it was so painful inside, it's impossible. It's impossible to stay with such pain. And it's better to jump out the window to a certain death than to live with the pain that was going on inside them. And unfortunately, we know how true that is, especially in our Kehillah, how true that is, that unfortunately, some of these children prefer to jump out the window, so to speak, than to live with the pain that they're going through. The last point that I want to make on this topic is that often people will say to me, okay, so they've been through trauma, they've been through abuse, let's say, maybe they have, maybe they haven't, but this has been going on for years. Since the beginning of time, people have been struggling, people have been had traumas, people have been through, they should stop being a victim and they should get on with their life. It's enough already. They don't need when they're looking for, I actually heard that once from a Rav who said to me, well, this boy's looking for an excuse to go off the derech. I can assure you there's no kid that's ever gone on their own derech that looked for an excuse. Never. It happened. And not only that, but they're struggling so hard to try and belong somewhere. None of them are ever looking for an excuse. And no successful kids ever turned around and said, my life's so good. I want to pack it all in and I just want to cause everyone aggro. I want to mess my life up. That doesn't happen. Something has happened tremendously wrong. And we've attributed that already. We've said that that only comes because of some trauma that has happened in their life. So this question, why is trauma so devastating? Why does trauma wreck them so badly that they can't function? So I think therefore it's important, although I'm not a psychologist, but I think it's important to try and understand why trauma has such a devastating effect on sufferers of PTSD. So what I'd like to do is give a very, very brief, certainly not a comprehensive understanding of trauma and what it does to the person. Okay, so for an example, let's take a greenhouse. A greenhouse, we all know what a greenhouse is. I know we have listeners from America. I don't know if it's called the same thing in America, but a greenhouse is a glass house where we grow plants and vegetables. So imagine you have a greenhouse in your garden and you have inside a lizard which is trying to find water. The sun's beating down on this glass house and the lizard is jumping around from plant to plant and it's desperate for a drink of water. So obviously, how are we going to calm this lizard down? The only way we can calm this lizard down is by giving it a drink of water. The question is, why can't we just say to the lizard, sit down where you are for 5 minutes. Just sit on your place for 5 minutes. We'll get you a drink of water. Once we see you behaving, in 5 minutes time, we'll get you, in 2 minutes time. Just sit on your place for 2 minutes and we'll get you a drink of water. Is that going to help? Of course it's not going to help. The lizard doesn't understand that. It's a reptile. It's just an animal. It knows it needs water. The only way to calm that lizard down is by giving it water. Now we have a small part in our brain which is called the amygdala brain, which is the fancy name for it, the amygdala brain, and it's known in layman's terms as the lizard brain. This brain is probably the most powerful part of the brain, and this is responsible to alert the body to danger. So what usually happens is when a person is facing danger, it will release adrenaline, which will send a message to the nervous system, which will release adrenaline, which basically makes the heart rate go faster, it makes a person perspire, it gives a person extra strength, it adds oxygen to the limbs, and gives a person less of a perception of pain. So what it does is usually three things. So let's say you come out of your house and you see a wild dog, being a good Jewish person, scared of dogs, and what the brain will do will tell you, danger, there's a wild dog up the road. It will make you run as fast as Usain Bolt. A person will run faster than they've ever run before because the brain will overtake their thinking. It will say, although it's not clever to run away from a dog, they can always run faster, but the brain will tell you, danger, flight. Run as fast as you can. And often we'll run faster than we've ever run before because of the adrenaline that's pumping inside us, released by the amygdala, by the lizard brain. That's one scenario. In other scenarios, you could see, let's say a mother comes out and she sees her child trapped under something heavy. There's many stories of this. People have seen their child trapped under a car, and mothers have been able to lift the car up. They find the strength to be able to lift the car up because they don't think. They see their child trapped, and immediately they will go to the rescue of that child, and they'll find strength that you've never had before, because the amygdala brain will just shoot out those hormones of adrenaline, and the person will find the strength that he needs for that moment. And then there's the third case. The third case is where a person is trapped, where a person is unable to do anything about the situation. So then the amygdala brain will send out so much chemicals that it will numb the body, it will make the body freeze. So you have flight, fight, and freeze. The freeze cases are where somebody's in a car crash and they're trapped, and they can hear things going on around them, but they go numb. When somebody suffers sexual abuse, that can happen as well. When they're suffering childhood trauma, when a child is watching parents have a huge fight or having domestic abuse, and a child is stuck and he's seeing this going on, that childhood trauma can affect him for the rest of his life. His brain will tell him to just freeze, to numb out, to just disconnect himself from the entire situation around him. So whenever somebody feels helpless, the amygdala brain tells them, just freeze. Now, ideally, the amygdala brain will usually switch off after 20 to 30 minutes when there's no more danger. It will make the person relax again, and a person can get on with his life. But in cases of PTSD, where a person have been also on a battlefield, they've learned this a lot from soldiers, veterans who've been on the battlefield, and they've seen terrible things. The amygdala brain reacts to things that it perceives as a trigger of trauma. Now, let me explain this. Take a boy in school, an 11 to 12-year-old boy in school, who's molested by an older boy. Now, unfortunately, this does happen. He's molested by an older boy who's already in the base of Medrash program, who's already wearing a hat and jacket. The brain immediately associates the hat and jacket as a trigger to the trauma. So you have a 10-year-old, 11-year-old boy who's molested. It's a terrible trauma for him. There's nothing he can do. The older boy's older than him. He's trapped. The brain can relate that hat and jacket to trauma. He comes to bar mitzvah age, and he has to put on a hat and jacket. He goes to shul. All he sees around him is hats and jackets. That brain, the lizard brain, is telling him all the time, danger, danger, danger. You've got to be aware. These could be triggers. These could be, although they're not, but because it's in a freeze situation, it's reacting to terrible trauma in a bad way. It's taking regular things around him and causing those to be trauma. A child who's heard pots and pans being thrown around, and he hears the clink of a pot or a pan in the kitchen, that could set off trauma. The brain will tell him you're in danger. It will make him freeze and be unable to function as a normal human being. Another story from Rabbi Fishoff, when he was running an organization called Home Sweet Home, he had boys that were totally disbandoned by their parents, who were on the streets of America. And he opened up Home Sweet Home, which he ran himself to take boys in off the streets and give them a new lease on life. One of the boys that he took in was molested when he was 13 years old. And the smell of tefillin, his brain associated as a trigger to the trauma that he'd suffered. And for years, this boy never put on tefillin. After being under Rabbi Avi's care, he came to a stage where he was able to put tefillin on once again. And Avi came up with an amazing idea. For the next morning, he didn't tell him, but he stuffed that tefillin bag full of besamim bags, full of bags of besamim, in order that the boy shouldn't have to smell those tefillin. But for a moment, let's put ourselves in this bar mitzvah boy's place. Nobody knows what's gone on. He's coming to shul every single day, and he's seeing tefillin everywhere. He can't take it. His brain is telling him, this is crazy. We've got to protect you. And his brain is shutting him down. It's not allowing him to function in order to protect him from any damage. And of course, when the boy starts putting on tefillin, we blame it on religion. And really what's going on is he's suffering in pain. And Hashem, in his infinite kindness, he made that part of the brain the most powerful part of the brain. So we have the different areas of the brain. One of them that we use is for logic, for learning Torah, for learning, studying, doing schoolwork, for taking advice and doing logical things that we do every day. But the amygdala part of the brain is much stronger than that, for a good reason, obviously, because it alerts us to danger. If we were to cross the road and we see a car coming zooming towards us, if we were going to start making logical calculations, should I go forward, should I go back, it would be too late. So the lizard brain just kicks in, tells you, run back to the pavement. And when these kids are trying to lead a normal life, They're trying to get on with normal things such as learning Gemara, such as learning Chumash, such as behaving at the Shabbos table, such as doing their homework and picking up their socks and doing household chores like every other child does. The brain is telling them, stop, stop. You cannot go there. You're in danger. The brain doesn't allow them to function normally because it believes the body is still in danger. And it keeps telling that child, stop. And that's why they cannot accept logic. They cannot accept advice. It hurts because the brain doesn't let them go that way. You go in that area, you're going to get hurt again. We need to get you out of this area. Out of this area, stay in trauma, stay in freeze mode in order that we can protect you. And that's what's going on with these kids. And let's put that in a different way. Imagine that you had, let's put a stress level barometer. So we have a stress level barometer from 0 to 10. The easiest level of stress is 0, where most people hang around, a 0 or a 1. And high stress levels, the highest stress level is 10. So if you have regular people, their stress levels usually hang around a 0 to a 1 or a 2. And if you have a particularly hard day, the kids are playing up, or supper gets burnt, or it's been a long day, you've got a headache, your stress levels then rise. Maybe they'll rise 4 or 5 points, and it'll bring you to a stress level of a 5 or a 6, which is very difficult. Think of all those times you've been stressed out, and that's really hard to handle. But later on, when the kids are in bed, when supper's over, when everything's gone quiet again, you can sit with your feet up and the stress levels go back to a 0 or a 1. A child who's been through trauma, a child whose amygdala brain isn't switching off, never settles down to the stress level of a 0 or a 1. His stress levels are always around a 5 or a 6. Now, the same things that trigger us to have stress are going to trigger them. There's always going to be something which is going to trigger stress. If they're enjoying their book or whatever they're doing, and they're asked to come and help with the dishes or help with the supper or do something which is just nothing big deal, no big deal, and it stresses them out, their stress levels are also going to rise 4, 5, or 6 points. They're going to go over the top of the barometer. They're going to go over a number 10. And that's why we see so often when you ask a child who's struggling to do something normal, like just behave like a normal child, just put your socks on the washing, they act and they react crazily. They go smashing doors, they go smashing windows, they go swearing, and you're like, what made them go? All I did was ask something normal. And that's because their stress level got beyond a manageable level, because it's never at anywhere near a 0 or a 1. Now, if we take that for a moment and try and imagine what it's like, our most stressful moment that we've had in the last week, imagine your most stressful moment just for half a moment, and try and take that moment and think to yourself what it would be like to live with it for 24 hours, just for 24 hours, from the morning when you wake up to the next morning. Try and live in a high stress level, like when you're so angry that you don't want anybody to see you. You try going to bed at night with that stress level. How are you going to sleep? Wake up in the morning knowing that you're that stressed out. How are you going to face the day? Look at these children. They're on that level all the time. And when anything bothers them, they're going to shoot through the roof, and they hate themselves for it because they don't understand it. Whenever I've sat down with a child who's been struggling and I explain to them this, and I explain it in a very generic way, I say that this might not be referring to them. This might be something which is just by the way. And you literally see a light switch go on in their brain. Hey, I can relate to that. How do I get help for that? Because this is my life. This is how I live. And this is the truth of how they're living. Are there any questions so far on anything I've said? Okay, so I'd like to carry on with a story, if I may. I hope I have permission to say the story. This story took place in Rabbi Avi Fishov's Twisted Parenting group in America. The Tzchina Rav, who's a Rabbi AY Goldman, who's a very, very chashuv yid, who Tzchina Rabbi, he would go to the other one end of the world, from one side of the world to the other, to help a struggling child. So he was giving chizuk to the parents in the Twisted Parenting group in America, and he sent over this following story that happened with him. He was sitting shiva for his mother, and a couple of days before his mother was nifta, they'd heard about a second cousin of theirs, who had lost a child, a 19-and-a-half-year-old child who'd overdosed on drugs, committed suicide, whatever it was. He'd overdosed, and they were sitting shiva for him at the same time. Now, they didn't tell their father about it because they knew obviously he would be very upset. They wanted to keep it a secret from him. On the second to last day of the Shiva, towards the end of their own Shiva, the father and mother of this 19-and-a-half-year-old boy, together with the younger brother and sister, came into the Shiva. And so they came to be Menachem Oval. And so Rabbi Lezer, the Tzchina Rav, rushed them out as quick as possible because they didn't want anything to come out. They didn't want the father to hear about it at the time. And then he went outside and he was speaking to them outside in another room. And he said to them, it's amazing that you've come all the way from where you live, and you've just got up from Shiva yourself. What? We certainly didn't expect you to come. How come? How come you came all the way here? So the Tzchina Rav, so they turn around to the Tzchina Rav and they say to him, well, obviously, the nature of the circumstances that was surrounding the death of our child, our 19-and-a-half-year-old. So because it was a suicide or a suspicious death, the police go through all the phone records. And we saw that over the last 6 years, since our child started struggling, there was one number that kept coming up every single Friday. And that was your mother. Your mother used to call every single week when our child was struggling. So we felt that was only right for us to come and be Menachem Ovel. So Rabbi Lezer said to them, wow, he never knew that his mother had done that, and it was really comforting to hear that that was what was going on. And he turns around to them and he says to them, Stephen, whatever his name was, he says, it must have been really, really difficult. I can imagine the Shiva must have been so terribly painful because people come in and they say, very well-intentioned, very hurtful things. So he says, no, it was okay, it was all right, we got through it. So he goes, no, tell me, if you want me to shut up, I'll shut up. But this is what I do. I go around being, comforting people. So he says, to tell you the truth, it was really, really hard. The beginning of the Shiva was really, really hard. But, we've got a new young Israel rabbi in our area. And he came in the second to last day of the Shiva and he gave us a Nechama. He gave us a huge Nechama. So Rabbi Lezer says to them, do you want to share this Nechama with me? So they said, yeah, we'll share you the Nechama. The Nechama is that he told us, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is careful. He doesn't punish a teenager. Clearly, HaKadosh Baruch Hu gets teenagers. A teenager isn't punished b'din Shemai until the age of 20. And Baruch Hashem, your son died at 19-and-a-half. You can be guaranteed that he's got a place in Gan Eden because he died and he's not chayav b'din Shemai for all the averos that he's done. And Rabbi Lezer the Tzchina Rav started to cry. And they're like, no, don't worry, it's fine, we're okay with it. He goes, no. He goes, you don't understand why I'm crying. You think I'm crying at what he said, and I am crying at what he said. You're saying that it's a nechama. He goes, let me ask you a question. This boy suffered for 6.5 years. Terrible, terrible yisurin, terrible pain. So bad was the pain that he suffered from the trauma that he'd been through. He had to decimate his feelings to be able to somehow get through the day with movies, with drugs, with girls, with terrible parties, with terrible places that he was going to, just to try and dull that sense of trauma, dull that sense of stress that he had. He went through such pain. He had no moment of peace and quiet. And you're saying that a person under the age of 20 is not chayav b'din shamayim. That's a kasha, that's a question. That's not a comfort. How could Hashem make somebody under the age of 20 suffer so badly? How could a boy who wasn't chayav in Hashem's eyes suffer so much pain and so much yisurin that he had to wreck his life like he did and ended up overdosing? That's a question. It's not a nechama. It's not a comfort at all. And the Tzchina Rav said to them, I'll explain to you what the nechama is. We don't understand, but this is what we have a Masorah from our forefathers, from our Rebbeim. And he said like this, there is such an idea as that we all know clearly that the misa of a tzaddik is machapa. It atones. When a tzaddik dies, it atones for the generation. But there's also another idea. In the times of the Beis HaMikdash, there used to be a carbon which was brought every morning and every afternoon. The carbon tamid was brought in the morning sacrifice and the afternoon sacrifice. The morning carbon was brought in order to atone for all the averos, all the sins that were done through the night. And the afternoon carbon was brought in order to atone for all the sacrifices that had been, all the averos that had been done during the day. Since the Beis HaMikdash, HaKadosh Baruch Hu doesn't have this carbon tamid. And the carbon tamid was a regular carbon, was a sheep like any other sheep. But there was nothing special about it. It was a regular sheep. Since the times of the Beis HaMikdash, HaKadosh Baruch Hu doesn't have that sheep. It doesn't have that carbon every morning and every afternoon. And instead, the karbanos are our teenagers, our young children who are struggling, who aren't chayiv in Hashem's eyes, who haven't done anything wrong in Hashem's eyes. They are the carbon tamid that HaKadosh Baruch Hu takes every day. Not necessarily takes, but the ones that the struggles that they're going through are the carbon tamid for the rest of Klal Yisrael. And he turns to the younger brother and sister and he says to them, when you're young children, you're young teenagers yourself, and you have to make sense of life, and you're going to go out to the field, you're going to go out to the Beis HaChayim, you're going to go out to your brother's cave and you're going to stand at the cave and you're going to think to yourself, yuck, you saw what he was busy with. You're going to think to yourself, what about Taiva? You're going to think to yourself, what a terrible kid. but you should know you're standing at the feet of a korban tamid. And he turned to the parents and he said to the parents, when you go into the base of Medrash and you see other people celebrating the bar mitzvahs of their children, you see fathers learning with their children, you see people celebrating the marriages of their children with such nachas, with such a perfect family, know that it's at your expense, to the expense of this korban tamid, that you were makriv, that they are able to have that peace and quiet. And unfortunately, Manchester, we know only too well the suffering that pushes these children so badly. And unfortunately, we know it only too well. And again, we have to remind ourselves the levels of stress these kids live with. Nobody would ever choose to live such a life. Nobody. And there's no question about it. And I've asked boys who are struggling this myself. If they had the opportunity to change with somebody who's doing well, they would do it in an instant. They wish they could swap places with somebody who doesn't live through the struggles that they live in. And that means not having all the perceived parties that they're having. That means not joining in all the nightclubs, the drugs, the raves, and all the other things that they get involved in. They would change that instantaneously to be the most successful kid in yeshiva in SEM. So, before I take questions, let's just quickly summarize that. First of all, we have to remember we are a junior partner with Hashem. Hashem is a senior partner. He's entrusted us with this neshama. He knows and has chosen us. We're going to be the best parent for this part of him that he's entrusted us with. Second of all, we have to have emunah. We have to remember that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is orchestrating the entire narrative of our lives and the lives of our children. There's nothing that goes on in our life that is not orchestrated and not preordained by Hashem for the best for us. And having emunah and knowing that Hashem has got our best interests in mind and believing that we're in Hashem's hands and we can just fall into Hashem's hands and know that He's got our best interest there is very, I don't know the word, it's very relieving to know that HaKadosh Baruch Hu's got us, He's got our back, and He's with us every single step of the way. And I want to say, I know we have with us Rabbi Gedalia Miller from Kesher Nafshi, who has put together a huge organization for parents, to give parents who've got struggling children, they have a Shabbaton together, an unbelievable organization, which seriously, if you ever want to donate somewhere, Kesher Nafshi. They put together a retreat. We all know that Camp Simcha does a wonderful job for children who are struggling from physical illnesses. There's nobody who's giving relief to the parents who are struggling with children, and you have no idea the suffering that they go through unless you've been through that suffering yourself. And I was able to be at the Shabbaton last year, and I can't tell you, the people there all live with Hashem. And I spoke to so many parents there, and they all say it's just, they would never trade in their experiences for anything else in the world, because it's brought them so much closer to realize that Hashem is with us all the time. They have you could really feel when you were there, you could really feel that Hashem was at one with us over there. It was just unbelievable. There was this skalas of Shekhinah, you could really feel the Shekhinah there with all those parents over there. And Rabbi Shalom HaRosh writes in his book, Garden of Emunah, that there's no point getting angry at a stick that hits us. If a person hits us with a stick, you're not going to look at the stick and shout at the stick. You're going to look at the person who's wielding the stick, and you're going to shout at that person who's hitting you. And with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, there's no point looking at our child and getting angry with our child that he's putting you through all this stress, he's putting us through all this stress, because he's merely doing he's going along the path that Hashem has put him along. Hashem's guiding him there, and Hashem has made it that you should be suffering this stress right now. So let's turn to Hashem in that, and have emunah that whatever Hashem is doing, He's with us. And of course, we have to daven really, really hard that our children are successful, and we're able to be successful as parents for them. And I think it's also interesting to mention, I was speaking to, when COVID first came in, so I was speaking to my Bacharim about the challenges of their generation and the challenges that they face every single day. You know, we all have to have respect for any Bachar sitting in yeshiva, any girl that's sitting in SEM, any of them that are doing any avodas Hashem. It's so difficult for them. There are so many distractions. Without a doubt, anyone in my generation and above who will be living in this generation today would never be able to withstand the trials and tribulations of this generation. And the boys asked me, what was your generation's trials? And it set me thinking, because I grew up in a generation where I wasn't brought up by Holocaust survivors. My parents' generation were. And we didn't go through the Holocaust, Baruch Hashem. And we really had it all. We had Baruch Hashem, and Hashem should help us continue to have a beautiful life. But we really didn't have any real strong trial and tribulation. There wasn't any nisayon, so to speak, in our day. And I thought to myself, and what I said back to the Bacharim, and they appreciated it, was that maybe our trial and tribulation is to be parents to their generation, to understand them, to not judge them, and to be there for them. Maybe that's what our nisayon is. And third of all, more important than anything else, we have to remember, and this is the whole point of this conversation, is to remember that no child chooses to go OTD. No one is going to make a decision, I'm going off the derech or on my own derech. And therefore we can put that fear away. We can relax and know that unless something has happened to our child, he's not going to go off the derech. He might be a teenager, he might be boisterous, he might do things that he's not supposed to do, but he's not just going to go off the derech. It's fine. The schools don't need to worry if a child is out the box, is doing things which might not be according to the law. He can be naughty because teenagers are naughty. Teenagers like to experiment. And when we were teenagers, no question about it, when we were teenagers, we were also able to misbehave and have that freedom to misbehave. So, of course, if we're worried, it should be no different from fear of a physical illness. We know no one wants to get ill, and of course there's some fear. No one ever wants to take on themselves. Everyone davens that they shouldn't get ill. But it doesn't stop us enjoying our life. It doesn't stop us doing the things we enjoy doing. And so much more so, fear that our child might go off the derech cannot in any way whatsoever stop us enjoying our child, enjoying our teenager, and sharing in the things that they're interested in. We so much need to be relevant in their lives, because if we're not relevant in their lives, they're going to find somebody else to be relevant in their life. So if they enjoy listening to the news, that's okay. If they enjoy speaking about sports and they enjoy speaking about cars, I'll tell you a story that happened to one of my Bachrim. He came to me and he told me that he said to his father, he was driving with his father, and he said to his father, hey, look, there's a new BMW M4 car, whatever it was. And his father's response was, it's not going to get you to Gan Eden. Now the boy was 14 years old and he was struggling actually. The boy was like, all right, you're just irrelevant in my life. I'll go and find the people who are relevant. He'll find social media, he'll find other people out there, and they will become the relevant ones in his life. We need to enjoy our teenagers and work it out, make sure we've worked it out, that we can start to enjoy them. We can have conversations with them about regular things, about the things that we enjoyed when we were their age. And it's not a problem if the conversation isn't about Torah or isn't about sneers. It's fine. Let's talk to them about the things that they enjoy, and that way we become relevant. We have that relationship with them. And then if chas v'shalom, one day they do suffer through something, we will be the first ones they're going to turn to, because they know that they have a shaykhus, they have something to do with us. They're relevant, we're relevant in their lives, and they feel that they can connect to us. Of course, if they do show worrying signs, then you must get the right help. It's so, so important to speak to an expert. Obviously, don't speak to somebody who's going to tell you have to send your child away from home, or that you've got to put down boundaries, and if they don't keep those boundaries, they're out the house. No child should ever, ever feel that his belonging at home is conditional. It can never be conditional. Hashem's given you that neshama. How are you going to turn around and say to Hashem, well, sorry, you didn't keep to my boundaries? And Hashem's going to say, you kept to my boundaries? We can never make our children feel that being in our home is conditional. That is so important. But of course, if we are worried about their behavior, speak to a professional, speak to somebody in the field who knows. Get advice before it's too late. You might not be able to stop a child going off the derech, and in fact you can't, but you can do so much to help their journey, and you can definitely be there for them at the end of the journey. And then in Mitzvah Shem, once we've understood that we don't have to be scared of this, we can start to move forward and try, which will be next week's topic in Mitzvah Shem, to enjoy our teenagers. I have a couple of questions that have come in. So the first question that came in, we'll just have a look at it now. So somebody's asked, how would you ever find out if your child has suffered abuse? So the truth is that you might not. It could be, and I want to know, is it that they'll just find Judaism so restrictive? So if Judaism is being going over in a restrictive way, then yes, they might find it restrictive. But they're not, that usually if they're having nothing to, religion in and of itself isn't something which is going to make them have nothing to do with it. It's because usually something else is bothering them that they would totally throw off every single way they've been brought up. If they found, now, it is important to say, actually, it's a good question, that it's important to say, if a child has found Yiddishkeit oppressive, then Yiddishkeit will be the trauma that they've been through. I've worked with I worked with a child whose earliest memory was at 6 years old, being dragged down the stairs to shul. Now, he is totally cut off from anything. He's one of the loveliest boys I know, but he's got a disconnection, he's got disassociation, he cannot relate to anything because Yiddishkeit was the trauma. So because that was the stick he was being hit with constantly, if he didn't eat a kazayas in time, when on Shabbos, if he didn't, whatever it was, all sorts of different issues. They didn't stand ramrod straight by Kiddush. If they didn't sing when their father sang, if they didn't listen to the Dvar Torah, which was given as part of one of the courses of the Shabbos meal, then of course they're going to resent Shabbos. If Shabbos isn't enjoyable, they're going to resent Shabbos. If davening isn't enjoyable, they're going to resent davening. And if Yiddishkeit is something which is a burden, then that might, yes, become the trauma. It might not be abuse. It could be the trauma, could be Yiddishkeit, and then we have to readjust our Yiddishkeit with them and let them find their own way back to it. But of course, it might not be abuse, and it might be Yiddishkeit, but that's only if Yiddishkeit has been a trauma for them. It could have been a trauma for them in school. They might have been told off in school because of their Yiddishkeit. There might have been lots of different things that could have happened in the name of Yiddishkeit, which could genuinely be Yiddishkeit could then become a trauma, but same trauma as anything else. Hope that answers. Are there any other questions? Okay. If anyone has a question, they're welcome to ask.
Is it possible to get your number for a few questions?
Sure. If you want to message me, I'll see if I can message you privately.
How do I message you through what?
I'll look for you now. I'll look for you on the list now, and I'll send you my number.
Thank you.
If you want, I can give it now. I can give it now anyway over the thing if anyone wants my number. If you're calling from America, it's +44. You have that?
Yeah.
7730 748 400.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay.